Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Civilian Podcast. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Hike. And what are we talking about today, Jeremy?
Today's topic is the fall of the middle class.
The good stuff.
Getting into the goodies.
Yeah. Bring back the dark ages.
Yeah. So during that time period, the rise of the middle class, you have this idea that something gave them their power. And that was the Industrial Revolution. And so you created merchants out of the peasant class. They rivaled the power of the feudalistic system. We're going to go back to this type of scenario.
Yeah, also with that kind of, because the middle class was better off, they were making more offspring, so the population grew too, became a big problem. Now, kind of with the middle class going away, we're going to see how that also becomes a problem too, right?
Yep.
You need to reduce the population because there's a lot of useless eaters. Yeah, so I guess before we start, we'll do our regular house cleaning,
Thanks for all the views, the likes, the subscribes, the shares, the comments.
Especially the shares.
Yeah, it means a lot. Some people like the notes, some people don't like the notes. We figured out that there's more that like them than not.
Yeah,
and
so I guess we'll go with this until something new pops out, right? Yeah.
And so for the more complicated stuff, I think the notes are good. For the more conversational stuff that we'll get into later, we can switch back to like the wider angle.
Yeah, just I guess to lay down our plan kind of comes down to there's a lot of backlog of information that we wanted to get out first, and then we will start covering more like currentish events. Why are we in the position where stuff like this is happening? And most of it is going to refer back to this. So we wanted to make sure we have all this out because it shows the system being built, right? And then it's going to be a lot easier to understand. Right. All we're doing is just bringing the data to you. And again, like we say, bring all the data to the table, let the rational person make the decision, right?
Right. So with that, I mean, theiconiclabel.com for support, hoodies, hats, and T-shirts for each of the corresponding podcasts. You can support us on patreon.com/theiconicpodcast for whatever monthly contribution you can make. Each contribution helps immensely, so we appreciate those that have supported us in the past and those that may support us in the future. Thank you as well. Anything else?
Yeah, we're everywhere. If you want to find us, Instagram now, we're going to start posting a little bit more, even smaller snippets on Instagram in the form of like Reel or TikTok and all that stuff too. So you can get like more bite-sized versions of it, more shareable. And then we also have the iconic highlights on YouTube, where again, some of these long podcasts in somewhere around 8 to 12 minutes, more like topic by topic, some of the questions just by themselves. So it's easier for you to keep track of, or again, if you want to keep it for later reference or share them too. Right. So.
Yep. Are we ready to get into it?
I think so.
Okay, let's get into it. So now, we've said that the New World Order is nothing but the Old World Order 2.0. And so how did the king, the queen, the emperor maintain control and power back in the feudalistic system under the Old World Order? Well, by three things. They had manageable population sizes. Of those population sizes, many of the people were uneducated or illiterate, and they were uninvolved in their political affairs. They had no participation in their political future. And so this is how it's going to be during the global state. This is how they're going to maintain power.
I was going to say that was me up until maybe like 16 years old. Uneducated and not participating in my...
that's where most of us are, right? So this is how the global state is going to maintain power as well. And so it's a limited world population, a population of uneducated, indifferent, or disinterested, or dumbed down citizens that cannot play a role in their political future. And so that, the last piece of not being able to play a role, it's going to be because it's going to fall into this idea of like you're owning nothing and you'll be happy. And the state will provide everything for you. And you have the unelected bodies of unelected officials making decisions. And so you're cut off from the decision-making process. And so there's a new difference, though, a key difference that's actually it's the makeup of the population itself. So this new population will be a modified population. It won't be able to revolt in the future. The idea is that the New World Order 2.0 will be future-proof. This is the idea, right? So through technology.
Because they know that revolutions were the ones that kind of got rid of the monarchies and all that stuff, right? So you have to prevent that, because if you're going to build another monarch...
if you're building back better...
Yeah. You have to make sure that you learn from your first mistakes,
right.
Which not mistakes, but it was by design, right?
Yeah.
Now you know what the weak spots are.
Right.
If people get together and decide that whatever you say doesn't go anymore, then it doesn't go anymore.
Right. Yeah. And so to do this, you have to control the genetic makeup of the human population and modify it in a way that, you can control going forward. You're going to control it by what different ways? Well, by what it eats. You're going to change the flora in its gut to only eat the food that you provide it to eat. You're going to change it at a DNA level, and so that you'll literally own the DNA of this population, and then you're going to control what it can, how it, basically its breeding potential, how it can breed, if it can breed, and the reasons for why it's allowed to breed. And so, in other words, you have to be able to hack humanity in order to do this, right? And so, now, how would you hack humanity? And so Yuval Harari, in speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos 2020, gives us the equation for how you hack humanity. He says B times C times D equals A. And what is that? Well, B is biological knowledge, C is computing power, D is data, then H is the ability to hack humans. And so he says, if you know enough biology and you have enough computing power and data, you can hack my body and my brain, my life, and you can understand me better than I can understand myself. He says, you can know my personality type, my political views, my sexual preferences, my mental weaknesses, my deepest fears and hopes. You know more about me than I know about myself. He continues and says, and you can know that not just about me, but about everyone. A system that understands us better than we understand ourselves can predict our feelings and our decisions and manipulate our feelings and our decisions and can ultimately make decisions for us. And so he says, in the past, many tyrants and governments wanted to do it, but nobody understood biology good enough or well enough, and nobody had enough computing power and data to hack millions of people.
I like that he used the word tyrants.
Yeah. And so he continues and says, but soon at least some corporations and governments will be able to systematically hack all the people. And the kicker, we humans should get used to this idea that we are no longer mysterious souls. We are now hackable animals. And in another speech entitled, Will the Future Be Human? Yuval Harari, speaking at the World Economic Forum again, says, well, we are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens. Within a century or two, Earth will be dominated by entities that are more different from us than we are different from Neanderthals or from chimpanzees. Because in the coming generations, we will learn how to engineer bodies and brains and minds that they'll be main products in the economy of the 21st century. Not textiles and vehicles and weapons, but bodies and brains and minds.
So like human 3.0, I guess, at this point, right?
There you go. Yep. And so he continues and says, now, how exactly will the future masters of the planet look like? This will be decided by the people who own the data and whose control of the data, whoever controls the data controls the future, not just of humanity, but the future of life itself.
Yeah, and again, if we go back to one of the codes which says you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, and here we have a conversation of owning something, right? So we already disqualified.
Right. So now think about it. And so now we have here, so this is why Elon Musk was willing to overpay for Twitter, because of all the data associated with it, not to save the rights of free speech for people in a dying nation state.
No, he wanted to give me my free speech back, Jeremy.
No.
No?
And so now you go, wow, so if data is the new asset, it's the new currency, it's the new thing, it's the new gold, then this is why people would position themselves in a certain way to be able to be the inheritors of all that coming future wealth based on these ideas. And so he provides us a history lesson, and he says, today, data is the most important asset in the world, and in ancient times, land was the most important asset. And if too much land became concentrated into too few hands, of humanity split into aristocrats and commoners. And in the modern age, in the last 2 centuries, machinery replaced land, and most important asset. And if too many of the machines became concentrated into too few hands, humanity split into classes and, capitalists and proletarians. Now data is replacing machinery as the most important asset. And if too much of the data becomes concentrated in too few hands, humanity will split not into 2 classes, 2 different species.
So it's not even like, hey, you're still a human, but you're a little bit lower class, or you're a peasant, you're a servant. You just, what I'm trying to think, I want to see if they want to keep the title of human for themselves, or that would be given to, so the lower level get human, and then they get some other title for themselves.
Right,
yeah.
That's interesting. So, that reminds me of the movie Elysium, where they leave. The elite live in this artificial environment that was created while the earth is kind of going to hell in the handbasket, so to speak. So this would be known as this is the transhumanist dream, to transcend what it means to be human and merge with technology. And then he tells us something else important. He says, why is data so important? Well, it's because we've reached the point where we can hack not just the computers, but we can hack human beings and other organisms. Well, what do you need to hack a human being? Well, he says, what do you need in order to hack a human being? You need two things. You need a lot of computing power, and you need a lot of data, especially biometric data. Not data about what I buy or where I go, but data about what is happening inside my body, inside my brain. How was all this made possible? He says, well, because two simultaneous revolutions, here we're getting back to the revolutions are always the things that make the mechanism for change. Because on the one hand, advances in computer science, and especially the rise of machine learning and AI, are giving us the necessary computing power, and at the same time, advances in biology, and especially in brain science, are giving us the necessary biological understanding. He says you can really summarize 150 years of biological research since Charles Darwin into 3 words. He says, organisms are algorithms. He says this is the big insight of the modern life sciences, that organisms are really just biochemical algorithms, and we are learning how to decipher these algorithms. And so, well, what happened when these two revolutions merge? And so now we're going to bring, Klaus Schwab back in here. He says, now, when these two revolutions will merge, when the infotech revolution merges with the biotech revolution, that's Klaus Schwab's fourth industrial revolution, you get this ability to now hack the human being, or hack humans. What was the most important invention during these revolutions? He says, and maybe the most important invention for the merger of the infotech and biotech is the biometric sensor that translates biochemical processes in the body, in the brain, into electronic signals that a computer can store and analyze. What can you do with this type of data? He says, and once you have enough such biometric information and enough computing power, you can create algorithms that know me better than I know myself. And humans really don't know themselves very well. This is why algorithms have a real chance of getting to know ourselves better. We do not really know ourselves. Well, what's next then? Well, he says, once we have algorithms that can understand me better than I can understand myself, they could predict my desires, manipulate my emotions, and make decisions on my behalf. Are there any risks? He says, if we're not careful, the outcome might be the rise of digital dictatorships.
Oh, wow.
Well, what does all that mean? Well, he says, in the 21st century, new technological revolutions, especially AI and machine learning, might swing the pendulum in the opposite direction that might make centralized data processing far more efficient than distributing data processing. And so, well, if that happens, what happens if democracies can't keep up? As if democracies matter. And if democracies cannot adapt to these new conditions, then humans will come to live under the rule of digital dictatorships.
So they're saying we have to be careful that doesn't happen, but if it happens, then you have no choice.
Right. Yeah, because he says the society is going to split into a different species at that point, right? And so, well, where are these digital dictatorships that you're talking about? He says, we are seeing the formation of more and more sophisticated surveillance regimes throughout the world, not just by authoritarian regimes, but by democratic governments. The United States, for example, is building a global surveillance system, while my home country of Israel is trying to build a total surveillance regime in the West Bank.
Australia is doing the same thing too. Canada is doing the same thing too.
Yeah. Uniformly across the world at the same time. Coincidence? No.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So, besides a digital dictatorship, is there anything else that's more radical ahead? He says, but control of data may enable human elites to do something even more radical than to build a digital dictatorship by hacking organisms. And so we ask the question, well, what might they do? Please tell us. He says, elites might gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself, because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it. And if indeed we succeed in hacking and engineering life, this will be not just the greatest revolution in the history of humanity. This will be the greatest revolution in biology since the very beginning of life 4 billion years ago. And so he says, if that happens, well, what's next? Well, science is replacing evolution by natural selection with evolution by intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds, but our intelligent design and the intelligent design of our clouds, like the IBM cloud, the Microsoft cloud. These are the new driving forces of evolution. Now, these are blasphemous statements, but we'll continue.
We'll keep that for God, King, Father, Friend. Yeah,
we will. Right. So he continues. May enable life after being confined for 4 billion years to the limited realm of organic compounds, since may enable life to break out of this into inorganic compounds. So after 4 billion years of organic life shaped by natural selection, we are entering into an inorganic life shaped by intelligent design. And so he says, this is why the ownership of data is so important. If we don't regulate it, there's the regulation part, right? A tiny elite may come to control not just the future of human societies, but shape of life forms in the future. And so, well, who's going to own this data? He says, so does the data about my DNA, my brain, my body, my life, does it belong to me or to some corporation or to the government or perhaps to the human collective? And so who's holding the data? At present, big corporations are holding much of the data and people are becoming worried about it. But mandating governments to nationalize the data, that's an important piece, may curb the power of the big corporations only in order to give rise to digital dictatorships. This is a big propaganda piece that we're reading here that's for this whole idea of like centralizing data, and so which is the precursor for why Elon Musk then buys these data mining corporations, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, then not only Elon Musk, you have Zuckerberg with Facebook, right? The whole metaverse thing, and he holds most of the data too. Again, he probably has more data on me than I have on myself. I don't have a single journal, but they probably have a list of things that And
then Zelensky's actions, and then the Bureau of Disinformation, right? So all of these things, they're just thesis, antithesis nonsense, right? So, but if you're familiar with how historically that has worked, then that just jumps off the page when you read it, right? So. So who should wield this type of power going forward, according to Yuval Harari? Well, speaking about politicians, he says, I don't think that we should give these musicians most sophisticated instruments to play on, and I certainly don't think that they are ready to be entrusted with the future of life in the universe, especially as many politicians and governments seem incapable of producing meaningful visions of the future. So don't give it to the guys that are over the nation states, by all means, right?
They're not there yet. Yeah.
Right.
Too lower level for him. Yeah.
Right. And so who can produce a meaningful vision of the future that we can entrust the future of life with, right? So that question itself is a ridiculous question. Nobody's asking you to figure this out. The life is not entrusted into these people, or
all of a sudden he already put himself as the authority to figure out who am I going to trust as an expert, right?
Right. Yeah. So only in a God, King, Father, for instance, only the author of life has that ability to make those decisions. And so in that context, none of the creation is ours. We were just stewards over the creation.
Yeah, but I like how they even hijacking the intelligent design and all that stuff too. Right now, everything has to be their version of it, which we kind of cover more in the God, King, Father, Friend podcast.
Right, yeah. And so he says, we had better call up, and listen to this, we had better call upon our scientists. This is the technocracy, the corporate technocracy, where you get the specialized scientists, the intellectual elite.
As you put it, that's if Fauci was the president, right? Yeah.
Right. And so we had better call upon our scientists, the philosophers, our lawyers, and even our poets, or especially our poets, to turn their attention to this big question of how do you regulate the ownership of data. The future, not just of humanity, but the future of life itself may depend upon the answer to this question. In other words, his fancy speech is simply the turning of the middle class into the peasant class 2.0, or turning us into katakunim, or the domesticated cattle. And so we have a reduction of the population, the ability to control the population entirely, rearrange and alter life itself to fit within this new system. No control by governments, corporations hold the data. This is the infrastructure for the corporate state that's going to give rise to this global state, because purposely seeding ideas that this thing is eventually going to need to be centralized. I mean, who are we going to give it to? America? Do we give it to Russia? Do we give it to China? So nobody's going to be like, yes, give it. So you're going to need an international governing body that takes it out of the hands of the irresponsible dying dinosaur nation states into this new thing, this new polished concept of global governance that's going to lead to global government. And so we go through Klaus Schwab's book now, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. Who is Klaus Schwab? Let's get into that. So he's the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. His Geneva-based World Economic Forum brings together once a year 1,000 chairmen and chief executive of the foremost global companies with another 1,000 world leaders, scientists, and journalists. And so, well, what is the World Economic Forum? Well, the World Economic Forum wants a global redesign to create public-private partnerships with the United Nations in which selected agencies operate and steer global agendas under shared governance systems. And so it says that a globalized world is probably best managed by a coalition of multinational corporations, governments, and civil service organizations, or CSOs, which it expresses through initiatives like the Great Reset and the Global Redesign. So now, what is the Great Reset? So the World Economic Forum proposed what's known as the Great Reset, which suggests that the globalized world is best managed by a self-selected coalition of multinational corporations, governments, and civil society organizations. Well, why would you do something like that? Well, because of what's known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Well, what is the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Jens Martens, in his book, The Role of Public and Private Actors in the Means of Implementing the SDGs, what are these? The Sustainable Development Goals, Reclaiming the Public Policy Space for Sustainable Development and Human Rights, This is part of the Interdisciplinary Studies in Human Rights. Page 209, it says, under the heading, Weakening the State, a Vicious Circle. It says, a telling example of this strategy is the report of the World Economic Forum on the future of global governance and redesign. The report postulates that the globalized world is best managed by a coalition of multinational corporations, governments, including the United Nations system, and select civil society organizations, or CSOs. And so why operate this way? What problems are they trying to solve? And further down it says, it argues that governments no longer are the overwhelmingly dominant actors on the world stage, and that the time has come for a new stakeholder paradigm of international governance. Okay, so we've heard this before. The nation states they've reached their maturity. They're now past their prime, and it's time for them to go. They serve their purpose. It's time for them to go.
And it's kind of like these are things that we already knew, right? Hey, these are not the people that are in charge.
Exactly.
It will just be obvious at that point.
Right.
It's one of those give us another conspiracy theory, this one's solved, right?
Basically.
When it finally comes out.
Right. And so now you have this idea. Further down, it argues that governments, again, are no longer the overwhelmingly dominant actors on the world stage. It's time for them to go. New stakeholder paradigm of international governance. And so, well, what does the World Economic Forum suggest? Well, the World Economic Forum, in their vision, includes a public-private United Nations in which certain specialized agencies would operate under joint state and non-state governance systems. Okay, so we're going to see the rise of the unelected bodies, of unelected officials that are making not only national but transnational decisions that affect more than one nation state.
Intergovernmental, I think that's the word they use.
There you go. And so, well, where can this information be found? Well, everybody's business, strengthening international cooperation in a more interdependent world. Page 9 says, the time has come for new stakeholder paradigm of international governance, analogous to that embodied the stakeholder theory of corporate governance, of which the World Economic Forum itself was founded. Okay, well, then what do they think should be done? The state-based core of the system needs to be adapted. They keep harping on this same thing. Nation states,
They have to go.
yeah, it's time for you guys to go. But adapted to what exactly? Well, to a more complex, bottom-up world in which non-governmental actors have become a more significant force. Well, why would you want to do something like this? Well, if you're someone like BlackRock, Blackstone, Vanguard, and you can put your money where your mouth is, then you're the assets under management by the world's largest asset management companies like BlackRock and Vanguard are upwards of 10 trillion. End of 22. That's higher than the GDP of Japan and Germany and most nations. So BlackRock is a country within its own right, without borders, without citizens, without democracy, without any of that stuff.
But with all the power, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so page 36, effective global governance requires many others, local and national governments, private individuals and corporate actors, the non-governmental organizations and social networks of civil society, our media, culture, and religious organizations, and more. Well, what does Santa Claus Schwab want to do about this? Well, he says, those who work in all these places must begin to think globally, to place the welfare of the global community higher than their priorities. So you have 400 civil society organizations and 40 international networks heavily criticized a partnership agreement between the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and called for the UN Secretary General to end it. Did he end it? Well, let's see. The letter called The Corporate Capture of Global Governance. The World Economic Forum Partnership Agreement is a dangerous threat to the United Nations. Now think of this, right? So the United Nations was set up by the Roundtable organizations to do exactly what this
Setup, yeah.
is set to do, right? So so you're asking the people that are actually doing this thing that now you've been able to identify, you're going to ask them to stop doing what they're doing, as if there's some other entity to appeal to.
Yeah, it's like asking the government to give up some power.
It's like asking a corrupt cop to investigate himself.
Yeah.
Right? So what did they outline the problem to be exactly? Well, the first step towards their global governance vision is to redefine the international system, consisting as a wider, multifaceted system of global cooperation in which intergovernmental legal frameworks, there it is, and institutions are embedded as core. Okay, so now remember the corporate state dissolving the wealth of the nation state, putting in the legal framework. Is the question before, why would these wealthy corporations then just give up all of that wealth? They're not, because it's being woven. The reason why they're able to do what they're doing is because that aspect is woven into the legal framework of this entire the entire panoply of the idea.
They were even allowed to get that big because this is the end goal, right? Yeah.
There you go. Right. They're just fulfilling their role. And so, well, what do they think the World Economic Forum really wants to do? Well, the goal was to weaken the role of the state in global decision-making and to elevate the role of the new set of stakeholders, turning our multilateral system into a multi-stakeholder system. Companies are a part of the governing mechanisms. Okay, so what's the big deal? What would that do? The letter continues. This would bring transnational corporations, selected civil society representatives, states, and other non-state actors together to make global decisions, disregarding or ignoring critical concerns around conflicts of interest, accountability, and democracy. Oh, so the unelected body of unelected officials supported by the international legal frameworks, by the CSOs and the corporations, putting the flesh on the bones of this international global body. These guys see that as a problem. And yeah, I concur.
Yeah.
Well, what else? It doesn't stop there. The public-private partnerships will permanently associate the United Nations with transnational corporations. This is a form of corporate capture. Well, of course it is. That was the goal. And so now imagine, reading this letter, knowing that this is exactly why you set up, and now there's an outside entity that's able to detail it piece by piece, right? So this is why you have all this propaganda that the United Nations is this peacekeeping organization. It's just a place for nation states to come together and voice their concerns about global common problems. Right? That's nonsense. That's the exoteric doctrine, right? The esoteric doctrine is completely different. And so they continue. We know that agribusiness destroys biodiversity. What else? Oil and gas corporations endanger the world climate. What else? Big Pharma weakens access to essential medications. Well, what else? Extractive corporations leave lasting damage to countries, ecologies, and people. What else? And that arms manufacturers profit from local and regional wars, as well as repression of social movements. And here's the clincher. All of these sectors are significant actors within the World Economic Forum. The very guys that are saying, hey, we need to save the world from all these polluters are themselves the biggest polluters that are putting out the propaganda. What did Lenin say? You don't go into a country that you're going to subvert with communism and tell them how bad capitalism is. Yeah. You become the greatest
biggest champion for the capitalism. Yeah,
by telling people how bad communism is. And when people like the rhetoric and they elect you to power, then you just implement communism, but under different terms in the capitalist environment. And so, well, what does the European Parliament think tank have to say about this, right? So we have a link here that people can follow. So why are they being criticized? Well, the article continues. To its proponents, the organization, through its meetings, enables businesses, NGOs, and political leaders to do what? Well, to meet and deliberate possible solutions to key issues on global concern. To its critics, the forum, and especially its annual meetings, are nothing more than an opaque venue for political and business leaders to take decisions or to make decisions without having to account to either their electorate or their shareholders. And so in November 15, 1999, an article Schwab says, global companies do not fit behind neat national borders. The sovereign state has become obsolete, says Schwab, as the world resembles regional powers. He says, we need a global issue alliance. The interviewer says, you mean global government? Schwab says, that's the last thing we want. We facilitate the process of decision making, right? And so now Schwab may not want world government, but there is someone else operating behind Schwab that Schwab fails to mention. And so what would be the purpose then of the World Economic Forum? Let's ask Ettore Gotti Tedeschi. He's an Italian economist and banker. He's the ex-president of the Institute of Works of Religion, also known as Vatican Bank. And he says in a video that we can put up later, Tedeschi says, what is it called? He goes, its name is the New World Economic Order. Well, when was it conceived? It was conceived between the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. Okay. Well, who was its originator? Its originator was Henry Kissinger. At the very beginning, it was a veritable reset. Okay. What were you trying to do with it? Well, we were trying to correct the mistakes that we have been making for the last 50 years, since the very first reset. So
learn from the mistakes and build back better.
There you go. There you go. Right. So, well, what was the first reset called? Oh, that was known as the New World Economic Order, which was designed in the 70s. And so what was the old New World Economic Order founded upon? Well, he says, it's founded upon a series of facts that ignore natural law, which we can define as not always natural and pretty utopian. After 50 years since the first reset of the 70s, it produced several mistakes. A second reset is needed today. And then he reiterates, he says, the current reset, commonly called the Great Reset, is nothing but a correction of the mistakes which we have been making over the last 50 years. So, therefore, thanks to, or rather taking advantage of, this unfortunate situation called the COVID pandemic, there is the possibility to boost, or rather, I will use a strong expression, to impose or cause to be imposed certain behaviors. Nevertheless, today, reset is the correction of the mistakes made by yesterday's reset.
So it's a great reset of their system. It's not for us. It's not for everything. This is for them.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's continue. So what was the problem that you were trying to solve then? Well, we had too many births. And as a consequence, the need to decrease the birth rate of the population. Wow. Okay, then...
he said it just like that, huh? Not even hiding at this point. Yeah.
Straight up.
Straight up.
So what was the first side effect to these policies? Well, he goes, the birth rate dropped, but where? In the Western world. The shrinking of the population took place mainly in the so-called Western world.
But that's the ones we need.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but where in the Western world? Well, the United States and Europe. Why is the population growth supposed to be reduced? And so he provides an answer. Because according to the neo-Malthusian worldview, the more people are born, the more people consume, the more people waste what nature provides for us. And so now we're going to get into this idea of reducing the population. So by another revolution, though. And so just as the Industrial Revolution got it all started with empowering the peasants to become the middle class and an aristocracy, we need a technical revolution that Klaus Schwab termed the Fourth Industrial Revolution to destroy the aspects of the Industrial Revolution, created the middle class, and turning the middle class back into the peasant class. Well, how are you going to do this? Well, we're going to do it a few ways. By limiting the amount of people that can actually participate in the job market. And so they will create an artificial or synthetic middle class then, removing the lifeblood of the middle class altogether, their ability to work and create wealth, which gave rise to them in the first place. And so, well, how are you going to do that? Klaus has already spelled it out. By AI, automation, algorithms, robot, and 3D printing.
You know what's the good thing? If they at any time they need interruption of that system, they have the cyber attacks that they're already preparing for. And,
right.
You know, they want to make sure that they're ready because the next cyber attack could be bigger than compared to that. COVID-19 would be insignificant.
Right.
What did it say?
A minor inconvenience.
Minor inconvenience.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so he says, remember, it was we were saying this. Remember, it was the Industrial Revolution that gave rise to the commoner that created the middle class. And once they got wealthy, they wanted to participate in their political future. They won't have that problem with robots. Robots are going to be robots. They're going to do exactly what they're told. And so a robot is, they'll be there in an assembly line making the next Tesla, so you don't have a factory worker that's sitting there that needs to change his shift or go home to be indoctrinated by CNN.
They have these human rights that you can only work a certain amount of hours. You have to give them breaks. You have to pay some sick pay, this and that. Robots eliminate all that too, right?
Right. And so, what does this next industrial revolution, what does it actually mean? Well, Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, in his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, puts it this way. He says on page 14, the first industrial revolution spanned from about 1760 to around 1840. Triggered by the construction of railroads and the invention of the steam engine. It ushered in a mechanical production. Okay, got it. Well, what happened next? Well, the second industrial revolution was started in the late 19th century into the early 20th century and made mass production possible, fostered by the advent of electricity and the assembly line. Okay, good, got it. Okay, what happened after that? Well, the third industrial revolution began in the 1960s. It usually is called the computer or the digital revolution because it was catalyzed by the development of semiconductors, mainframe computing in the 1960s, personal computing in the 1970s and 80s, and the internet in the 1990s. Great, got it. So, what do you think is going to happen next, Santa Claus? Well,
Santa Claus.
so I believe that today we are at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution. It began at the turn of the century. It builds on the digital revolution. Well, what characterizes this fourth industrial revolution then? Well, it's characterized by a much more ubiquitous and mobile internet, by smaller and more powerful sensors that have become cheaper, and by artificial intelligence and machine learning. Okay. There's a description from the book, that provides a good summary. If you read the description of the book, it says, artificial intelligence is already all around us, from supercomputers, drones, and virtual assistants to 3D printing, DNA sequencing, smart thermostats, wearable sensors, microchips, and that are small as a grain of sand. That really means that you're going to take the jobs out of the hands of the middle class so that you can gut the middle class and its wealth and its resources, and you can do this with a technological revolution. So what will the next decade look like in this scenario? Well, in the next 20, 40, 50 years, it won't be the immigrants taking the jobs of Americans as its claim. Well, what will it be? It's going to be AI, algorithms, robots, and 3D printers. And so it's going to put millions of people out of their jobs. If they're out of their jobs, they can no longer create wealth. If they cannot create wealth, then they will further lose their ability to participate in their political future and be relegated back to the peasant class as they were before, if they even exist at all, as a subspecies, according to Yuval Harari. And so, why will they lose their ability to participate in their political future? Well, because in the corporate state, which is the phase that we're moving towards, corporations control the economic, political, and judicial systems of nation states. And the corporate state will self-select from its own members, promotion from within, like many corporations do today, and will not be democratically elected.
It was never democratically elected.
Right.
But now officially.
That's
no more democracy, guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And so Klaus Schwab, again, executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, in his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, page 68, makes it clear. He says, governments must also adapt to the fact that power is shifting from state to non-state actors, and from established institutions to loose networks. Down below, he says, with few exceptions, policymakers are finding it harder to effect change. They are constrained by rival power centers, including the transnational, provincial, local, and even the individual. Micro powers are now capable of constraining macro powers, such as national governments.
So again, if you translate that into human, pretty much no more nations, and we make decisions.
Yeah. So what happens if large portions of the population become jobless? Well, the types of jobs that are going to be required in 2050, 2080 are not the same type of jobs that are available now. If that is the case, then the type of training for those new jobs, like creating virtual worlds, will be out of most people's reach.
I'm already disqualified. I can't create a virtual world yet.
And so the idea is what's going to happen at that point? Well, you get this systematic breakdown of the middle class because they won't be able to participate in the type of jobs that are required. And so, for example, if Amazon completely automates today, AI, algorithms, robots, and self-driving vehicles, and they lay off their current 1.1 million people, or if Walmart with its 2.2 million completely automates today, how long will it take these 3.3 million people to reinvent themselves? Are we going to have 3.3 million new entrepreneurs all of a sudden? Are they going to start their own businesses? Are they going to develop a new skill set?
No.
And then you say, okay, what if McDonald's lays off 200,000 people? What do they know to do to survive? This type of automation will affect the entirety of pretty much every industry, just like the Industrial Revolution affected all of these different industries. And potentially...
This is just reversing it, right? Yeah.
Right.
Control Z.
Right, yeah. And so it will replace not only millions, but billions of employees. This is why, Elon Musk recently said when he spoke at the World Government Summit, he goes, he's for the universal basic income because all these jobs are going to go away. And the type of jobs that people would normally get when they get laid off from their current employment status, they're going to go get service level jobs, right? They're going to work at a coffee shop or at a restaurant. But if all of those automate.
Yeah. And you're only talking about companies like in America and stuff like that.
Right.
Now imagine all the other companies across the world. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And so now we have this idea, like according to Statista.com, there's approximately 3.29 billion employed. And if you reduce all of that by automation, you know, if you reduce it by a third, then what do all those people that were previously able to work, but now they can't, and there's no there's no traditional jobs available for anybody. What becomes of these people? Because you've taken away all the jobs, the carrot and the stick now becomes this universal basic income. And now you no longer will have the opportunity to participate in your political future because the corporate state is in power. Who are you appealing to? Right. And so, well, if the jobs are taken away by the robots, and the type of jobs that are available you can't participate in, you will never receive training to participate there, but you still exist. Well, the population needs to be reduced then, because to have everybody on universal basic income, that's not sustainable.
It's unsustainable, guys. And what we're trying to do is be sustainable here.
So you reduce the population to make the universal basic income concept digestible, to make it come to fruition. And so we have this idea, like what we're seeing is the idea of the necessity of population to be reduced. If you're thinking about people in terms of their jobs and their contribution to society, then you run, that the whole idea has run its course. Like your usability in terms of like the job market, that has come to an end. We no longer need your services. Thank you. The at-will termination is now up. It's time for you to go. And so now, coupled with that is 1972 book, The Limits to Growth by Dennis Meadows. That was written, for the Club of Rome. Warnings for overpopulation. You get, there is no real function or purpose to the existence in the society. And so the useless eaters, as they're called, it's a population that is just consuming resources. They're living longer and they're producing more waste. So this is the idea that you're not contributing anymore. You just become a useless eater, consuming more resources, and you're still reproducing yourself, right?
We can't have that.
Right. So now you have what they would term infinite growth against the finite resource of the carrying capacity of the earth. You are now the virus that is the problem, right? So
we need to vaccinate.
So the whole idea of that, Gaia is now infected by the useless eaters, the human population that is parasitic, just living off of her, right? So, and so they go, you can make this case for the reduction of the population in favor of a select few who then that are beneficial to society in some way, under this idea of we can save mankind as a species and we can save mankind's environment or his ecosystem. And so I think this is a good place to stop, because next we're going to get into what this is going to get us on the grounds of like Gaia worship, and how they're going to make the transition from if it really is about these two ideas of like saving mankind as a species and saving mankind's environment. Then clearly those that aren't contributing anymore, those
need to go.
They have to go, right? So it's a tough decision. And then you're going to get the writings of Alice A. Bailey, who talks about the world wars, and she's like, a lot of people look at that as like a bad thing. We look at it like in using the we language. We look at it as like a surgeon who's, yes, you injure the body when you go to cut out a cancer, but that injury compared to what that cancer is doing to you,
it's the necessary evil idea, right?
Right. Greater good, lesser evil, right? So and when you look at like, yes, and you shouldn't look at these people as dying as a bad thing. You should look at it as like life itself gets to go on. The idea is that you're preserving life, not the form of life in this human being, but life itself gets to continue. And so we'll pick up that after in the next podcast.
Yep. I think we're right about an hour already, so it's a perfect spot. That being said, thank you everybody for watching. If you watch all the way to the end, Like, comment, share. We read all the comments. We appreciate all the likes, all the shares, and all that stuff too. You can support us directly by going to patreon.com/theiconicpodcast or theiconiclabel.com, where you can get yourself a cool merchandise, some cool like hats, hoodies, t-shirts. We have all that stuff. Anything else?
Patreon.com/theiconicpodcast if you want to support us financially.
Yeah. And all the other websites, we're there. All the other social media. We're going to try to be everywhere until they start kicking us out one by one, or if we stay there, even better. So you can find us everywhere, pretty much everywhere, by just looking up The Iconic Podcast. Or if not, who.be/iconic is our link tree, and it has most of them in there, at least all the main ones. And if this podcast is too long, I mean, I guess I'm saying it at the end, so if you stay towards the end, you're good, but you can get the highlights version of them at the Iconic Highlights. It's a channel on the YouTube.
Yep. Yeah. And we'll cut up smaller, even tinier bite sizes that go on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram, TikTok, and then I think YouTube Shorts too.
Right,
even easier to share and all that stuff too.
Yep.